My name is Mary Dojois, and I work with the Massachusetts Department of Labor Standards. And with me today is Maxine Garbo, who also works with the Department of Labor Standards. And we will be working today to help you learn how to manage a hazard communication and right to know program. If you have any trouble with the audio, please jot us a note and we will try to make adjustments so that everyone can hear. So things to learn from this training. This webinar is designed for a facility manager or a department manager who has been assigned the task of being the coordinator for a hazard communication program. So what we're going to talk through in the next few minutes is how to develop a written program, how to maintain safety data sheets, what good labeling looks like. We're going to review some tips on purchasing and storing chemicals, and then we'll talk about training employees and what the regulations require. You'll notice here on this little picture, you may be sharp enough to see that that binder book says safety data sheets. And way back in the old days, they used to be called material safety data sheets. So that is a name change made 2 years ago by OSHA. And that is so that chemical manufacturers who sell their products in the United States and sell their products overseas, they can send out the same safety data sheet now to all of their customers. So before we get really into the webinar, I wanted to just give you a heads up on some of the handouts that we have available for you to download. So over here in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, there is a box called Download Files. And there are some files that you can decide to download for your own use if you'd like. So we've got a right to know training outline. We have a sample hazard communication policy that we'll be walking through today. We have a copy of today's webinar is posted. And the last handout we have is a self-audit checklist. So the self-audit checklist will be the highlights of this webinar so that you and your safety committee or your facility managers can walk through your facility with the checklist and grade yourself on your hazard communication program. That is an optional tool. It's not required. And it's a tool that you use yourself in-house. You do not fill that out and submit it to Department of Labor Standards. It is just for you to collect your own feedback on yourself. Okay, let's talk for a second about what the regulations are and OSHA standards. So this is just a reminder here. Let's talk about our executive branch state agencies. And let's ask the question, do I have to follow OSHA standards? And the answer is yes. We have our new law, 454 CMR 25, which requires executive branch state agencies to comply with OSHA standards. So it is new. It became effective this March 2015. And that's one of the reasons we're having these Intro to OSHA webinars is to get all of the state agencies an introduction and get them up to speed. Now, there may be some people on this webinar who work for a municipality, who work for a county, or a non-executive state agency. So that might be one of the authorities or one of the state colleges. And we can ask the same question. Do I have to follow OSHA standards? And the answer is yes again. So municipal, county, and non-executive state employees are covered by Mass General Law, Chapter 149, Section 6, which requires employers to prevent work-related injury. So the OSHA standards outline a minimum strategy and requirement to prevent work-related injuries. You can do more than OSHA requires, but you can't do less. So let's talk about who is covered by hazard communication and right to know. What is the scope of that particular OSHA regulation? So all workplaces where a chemical product is used or stored is going to be covered by either the OSHA hazard communication standard or the Massachusetts Worker Right to Know regulation. And there's lots of job categories that handle these types of chemical products. So for instance, your facility maintenance departments, your custodian departments, your public works departments, housing authorities, fire, police, and EMS, your school departments, and any type of production shop. So there might be some public sector workplaces that have a print shop, a wood shop, and we've got our gas and electric utilities. They will all have some chemical products that fall under this regulation. So we'll talk for a second about the regulations that apply. There's two laws that are running parallel side by side, and they're almost the same. And so first we'll talk about the executive branch state agency, who now since March are required to comply with OSHA standards. So they are required now to follow the OSHA Hazard Communications Standard. And the regulation code, because there's always someone out in the audience that likes to know what the exact regulation is, it's 454 CMR 25, which explains the law for state workers. And the OSHA tag or citation would be 29 CFR 1910-1200. So 29 means Department of Labor, 1910 means OSHA, and then over here 1200, that means hazard communication. Now let's talk about other public sector employees that might work for a city or town, might work for a county court, or work for a different state agency that's non-executive branch. They are still required to follow the Massachusetts Worker Right to Know law. That was published back in September 24, 1984. It was written before the OSHA standard ever went into effect. So we were one of the states that were right there up front with keeping workers safe in that regard with chemicals. So the Worker Right to Know law, that tag is 454 CMR 21. There's also a community right to know law, but for worker safety purposes, we focus in on the Worker Right to Know law. And that Worker Right to Know law is that Mass General Law, Chapter 111F. The F part means it's the worker safety part of the regulation. And the laws are very, very similar, and we'll walk through some of the similarities here. Let me get rid of the green arrow for you. So the Right to Know law and the hazard communication both deal with chemical products, both require labels on all containers, both require you to maintain a material safety data sheet or a safety data sheet, both require training, and both have a small paperwork requirement. So the Right to Know law, the paperwork requirement is posting a poster in your workplace. And over on the OSHA hazard communication side, the paperwork rule is a written program. So today, down here in the download box, if you print out our sample written program, there are some fill-in-the-blank sections, and if you fill in those blanks, assign responsible persons, and then sign the bottom, you will have a program that meets that written program piece. And then you'll also have to assign folks that will make sure that these other components get completed. Okay, we talked about paper. So what's in a written program? The written program will talk about the requirements for labels, safety data sheets, storage, and training. And so a written program is mandatory for executive branch state agencies, and it's recommended but not mandatory for other public sector. So that's your city, town, and your non-executive branch. So the first section, it is fill in the blank. What you're going to do is you're going to write down your agency name and your agency street address. You're going to identify who the main coordinator was for putting that program together, and you're going to put down the date that the program was sort of approved and put into action. And we are going to review it. We'd like you to go back and look at it every year and to see if any changes need to be made, make them. If no changes need to be made, that's fine, but you sign it again and date it again. Then we need to know that it was reviewed and updated. Logistics are up to you on how many hazard communication programs you're going to have. So if we look at a typical town, they've got a lot of departments. They have fire department, water and sewer, library, police, and a lot of those departments work very independently. They have different superintendents, and they're almost like their own separate entities and separate companies. If that is true, then they will have a separate hazard communication program. Some departments, though, are very similar. You'll have one school department. You might have 7 buildings. You've got 3 elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school. In each one of those school buildings, you've got a custodian department, you've got a kitchen facility, and you've got your curriculum chemicals. You might have one master plan for all of the schools, but in your appendix, you're going to identify each school separately with the particular chemicals they've got in their building. So the logistics are up to you. Same for state agencies. So let's look at an executive branch state agency here. So first, we've got the Secretariat, and inside a Secretariat, there's going to be several different agencies. So let's look at the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs as an example. We might have Department of Environmental Protection, we might have Department of Conservation and Recreation, we might have Fish and Wildlife, and we're going to have several others. Within each agency, you might have several different regions with several different buildings. You will have to look at yourself on the way you're organized. It might make sense to have a different hazard communication program for each particular building. So for instance, one of the state hospitals might have their own, and the second state hospital would have their own program. But you might look at a smaller type agencies that are mostly office-based. They don't have lots of hazardous chemicals. I'm picturing a career center where I am housed, or Department of Motor Vehicles. It might make sense to have one central program, and then in the appendix list each building separately so that we know that they're covered. Having one central program might work really well if you've got a facilities department that rotates through all of those buildings and is responsible for more than one building. So we do want to make the logistics work for you and make sense for the way that you're organized. Whoops. Did I skip a page? No, sorry about that. All right, next in a written program, we need to identify responsible persons. So let me know, who is the person responsible for coordinating the hazard communication at this workplace? And you can identify them. Second, who is the person responsible for making sure that all chemical products are labeled? Then identify, who is the person responsible for maintaining the safety data sheets? And next, who is the person responsible for coordinating and providing training to employees? At some workplaces, it might be the same person for all 4 of those tasks. And at other workplaces, there might be different people assigned. Okay, the written program, if you print it out, you'll see there's lots of boilerplate text. And that's to make it easy for you to complete and fill out and not to have to reinvent the wheel. You are permitted to add more language in there that belongs to you. You can add more to this. The sample that we give you is, just contains the basics so that if you do fill that out, you will be in compliance. Okay, so one of the first requirements it will say is about labeling. And so let's talk about what a good label is. back in the old days, back in 1984 and 1985, I used to tell people it's okay to put a Sharpie label on your containers. So turns out, as of 2013, that is no longer true. So now there is a new labeling requirement, and there's more information. You can see here on this label, there's going to be more information. You're going to have the name of the product, you're going to have a warning, and you're going to have now a pictogram that explains some of the warnings with handling that material. These labels will come when I buy a chemical product. The manufacturer is going to sell it with the label there intact. The original manufacturer's label is always accepted, and we do not want to change those at all. The challenge becomes if we take a large container and then dispense it into smaller spray bottles to use in separate rooms. Those smaller spray bottles also need to be labeled. I can ask the vendor if they have labels they can send me. And I can also hop on to the internet, the Grainger catalog, and other vendors that are on the state vendor list also sell those labels. Okay, and here's a larger one that's blown up a little bit on all of the information that's going to be there. You're going to have the chemical name, some pictograms, and you will have the manufacturer's name down below. Okay, and the reason for this label change is to make it easier for the manufacturers and for the workers using the product, so that workers in the United States, workers across the globe are getting the same information. Okay, so back on that smaller spray bottle, we have a fancy name for that in the safety industry. We call that a secondary container. So your primary container is bought from the manufacturer, but when it's on my site, I might put it into a second container. If it's going to be not in immediate use, if it's going to be left on a shelf, it does have to be labeled. We need to have that legit OSHA label on that. The pictograms are new. They do take up some space, so that the labels are now larger. And depending upon the chemical product, there could be more than one pictogram. So this container here in the middle is flammable, it's toxic, and it also can cause, it's corrosive, can cause a skin burn. So they have 3 different pictograms on it. The common question that we get is about the NFPA diamond labels. Do I need to have the NFPA diamond on every single one of my chemical containers? And the answer is it's not required by OSHA, okay, and it's not required by the Department of Labor Standards. However, depending upon your facility, your local fire department might require it. So types of sites that do have that requirement is if you're a wastewater treatment plant or a drinking water treatment plant and you have outside large storage tanks outside your building, your local fire department might want you to post that NFPA diamond with the safety information on it. If your local fire department asks you to put that label on it, then you say yes and you do it. Okay, the next part of a program is actually knowing what chemicals are on your property and what chemicals your workers might come in contact with. And that is handled by something called an inventory list. So in the sample program that we provided there, we have a sample inventory list that was from one of the buildings that we worked with. What you will do is put down the name of your building and then have a list of the chemical products that you've got. So this inventory here, we've listed out the custodial department and the chemicals that they use. And we went over to the kitchen food services department and wrote down the chemical products that they have. So over on the right, if this is my closet, I need to go in there with a notebook and I need to start writing down every single chemical product that I have. It does help you if you put it in a department type order. So I've got my custodial department, my kitchen department. It makes it easier to keep track. And it does help me if at the end of it, the process, if I put it into alphabetical order, it will help me find those material safety data sheets later. Okay, so a separate inventory is required for each employer location. So I have a lot of state agencies that are in more than one building. So over here, I've got agency XXX located in Pittsfield. And over here, I've got the same agency, but a different building located in Alston. I need to have an inventory list for each of those locations. Okay, so required in the inventory list is each chemical product that I use or store on site, each chemical product that employees may be exposed to, okay, but I don't have to have, on that inventory list, I do not have to explain the exact quantities that I have. So over here, I've got the Gleam glass cleaner is on my inventory list. The list does not have to tell me how many gallons I have on site. And the reason is because that might change. It might change tomorrow. It might change next week. And it would, for most people, that would be really hard to keep track of. So I just want to know the manufacturer name and the product name. Also not required is the ingredient list. So on my inventory next to the Gleam glass cleaner over here, I am not required to list down the 4 ingredients that are in that product. Some people do it. It's a nice thing, but it's not mandatory. And the reason why it's not mandatory is I can flip over to that NSDS sheet and I can find the ingredient list there. Okay, the next requirement is safety data sheets. And the regulation requires me to have certain things. So the safety data sheet must be readily available to all employees during their work hours. The name of the product on the safety data sheet needs to match the name that I used on my inventory list. Okay, and let's walk through how to keep those in an efficient manner. So for each product on the inventory list, here's my inventory list over here on the left, and I have a product called Gleam Glass Cleaner. So for each one of these products here, I need to go obtain a safety data sheet. And lots of times what I do to confirm that I have actually obtained the correct one, on my own, I take a yellow highlighter and I highlight the name of that product, Gleam Glass Cleaner. It's just an easy way for your workers to find that safety data sheet afterwards. Oops. Okay. So lots of times what you'll see is a hazard communication book. So in that book, you're going to have your inventory list. It's just like a table of contents. And then also in the binder, you're going to have a separate safety data sheet for each product on your inventory list. And like I said before, what I do is I highlight the name of the product. And you'll notice, though, some of those safety data sheets, they're about 8 pages long. There's a lot of information, and sometimes it can be a little scary for your workers. Do I really need to know all 8 pages of information? And the answer is no. They need to know some of the information on this sheet. But the safety data sheet contains worker safety information. It also includes some environmental information. It includes some California reporting information, and it includes some firefighting information. So if you're a firefighter responding to a fire at the site. So for our workers who are using this correctly, what they need to know is the name of the product. They need to know if there's any handling directions. And then they need to know what's the first aid. So if I get this splashed in my eye, what am I going to do? And I can usually find that right there. I kind of mark those in yellow. I can usually find that information on the first 2 pages. And then I don't really have to worry about pages 4, 5, 6, and 7. I have to keep those on file, but your workers are not required to memorize that at all. Okay, so a good practice there is to highlight those sections, the first aid and the hazard statement. Okay, what's also required now is because of a new OSHA change, they've changed the name from Material Safety Data Sheet over to Safety Data Sheet. Your manufacturers within the next 2 to 3 years are going to be sending you new updated safety data sheets. When you receive a new sheet, you are required to go back into your files and replace the old one. So some of the old ones were 1-pagers. Some of the new ones now are the 8-pagers. It's just the way it is. And you can update those sheets. There is a transition period. So you are allowed to update those sheets as the manufacturer provides them to you. We are not asking you to go sit down at your computer right now and find all of those all in one day. There is a transition and there's a grandfathering. So you are allowed to keep the old ones until you receive a new one. Let's say, though, that, gee, I don't want to wait. I'm really interested in getting a new one, a new safety data sheet. There's 2 ways you can do that. You can call up your vendor and say, I would like a new updated sheet. Or sometimes you can hop on the internet and your manufacturer's website will have those for you to download. Okay, a common question we get is, can I keep my safety data sheets electronically? And the answer is yes, if, and yes, when. So yes, you can keep them on computer if that computer is available throughout the worker's entire shift. So that means first shift, second shift, third shift. It also means that there's no special password required to get into that MSDS site. And it also requires that you have the actual PDF files electronically on your computer, that you're not relying on Google. For many places, internet can go down. So we want you to have an actual hard copy of that safety data sheet on the computer that can be reviewed. And the reason for having 24/7 access is because if a worker is handling the chemical, gets splashed to the eye, they may need to go down to the emergency room. When you go down to the emergency room, you want to pull out that safety data sheet and bring that information with you. There are some chemicals that sound very, very similar, but the first aid and the medical treatment is different. So if you get splashed in the face with hydrochloric acid or get splashed in the face with hydrofluoric acid, the medical treatment is very, very different. So bringing a copy of the safety data sheet lets those physicians know what is the true chemical that you were exposed to and what the medical treatment recommendations are. Another common question that we get is, do I need to keep a book of safety data sheets in every single room? And the answer there is no, and there's a good reason for that. That master file of safety data sheets can be quite large for some workplaces. It's hard to keep those up to date and hard to keep those neat. So the regulation only requires one central file of safety data sheets. I do not need a binder in every single room. Now, however, some employers might decide to do so. That's a best practice. And what they do there is, for instance, you might have some custodial closets, and you have 4 products that the custodians use. You can put a very small binder or a see-through plastic sleeve into that custodian closet. You've got an MSDS for each one of those products, and you hang that up in the custodian closet. That is a best practice. Some people sometimes do that in their kitchens and their laundries. In that way, the workers who are handling their chemicals, you're maintaining a safety data sheet just for their department, and it's easier for those workers to actually get the MSDS that they want. They don't have to sift through all 300 products that you've got in the building. Another question that's important is that we do have some state agencies where employees are dispatched out to do field work. So they jump in a pickup truck or a truck and they go out, they might use some chemicals out in the field. You are not required to bring the MSDS or safety data sheet in the field with you each day. A central file back at the home office is acceptable. And the reasoning there is, let's say I do get sprayed in the eye with something that I was using out in the field. The reasoning is that you would dial into your home office and someone there could be able to send that safety data sheet to the ER for you on your behalf. So that is allowed. Another question we get is, do I need a safety data sheet for consumer products? And so sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes the answer is yes, it depends. But let's start with no, the simple answer. I do not need to keep a safety data sheet for a consumer product if that product is used in the same manner as I use in my own house. So over on the left there, I've got a picture of the Dawn dishwashing liquid, some whiteout, and a bottle of Glade air freshener. If my workplace, if I use the same amount that a household uses, then the safety data sheet is not required. Okay. Over on the right, though, you might have some departments where you use much more than household use. So for instance, in your laundry departments, you are using some laundry detergents, some laundry softener, some laundry sours in 5-gallon tubs, which is much more than household use. That means you do need to keep the safety data sheet. Same with window cleaners. We have people go through a bottle of window cleaner like that in 2 days. That is not the same as household use. And so a safety data sheet is required. Okay, the next part of safety data sheets is for special circumstances when contractors visit my property. So up top, we've got a picture of a water treatment facility, and they have large storage tanks of chemical products. And every few years, they hire a contractor to come onto the property and clean out that tank. I am then required to give that contractor a copy of the safety data sheet for the contents of the tank. So the person who coordinates my hazard communication program, which could be my facility manager, will need to give a copy of the safety data sheet to the contractor. And then the reverse is true. Let's say I'm having a contractor coming onto my property and they are going to resurface the gym floor. They're going to be applying a polyurethane product. You want to ask the contractor for a copy of the safety data sheet for that product. And they are required to give it to you. What you'll do then is you'll read that over. You'll ask the contractor, is this going to have any odors, any VOC off-gassing that's going to bother my building occupants? Chances are the answer is yes. And so you may decide to schedule that work on a Friday afternoon or a time when the building's going to be unoccupied. So all of that off-gassing and settling can occur when your regular building occupants are not there. It will help you reduce a lot of complaints. All right, so any questions on SDSs, you can type those in there. We'll try to address. I'm moving on to the next section, which is storage of chemicals. And there's some basic rules. All containers must be closed when not in use. It seems simple, but we do go to places where the cap has been lost and someone has taken a rag and stuffed it in the mouth of the container. That is not acceptable, and we would write that up as not acceptable. All of your chemicals need to be labeled. If you're not labeled, we've got a spray bottle here on this shelf in the middle here. Looks to me like it's not labeled. We would write that up as a violation and make you correct it, provide the correct labels. Over here on the left, I'm not quite sure if that's got the correct label on it or not. I would pick that up, turn it around, read that writing on that bottle to see if it's the correct label. Okay, so a best practice, what we'll see a lot in laboratories, is these spill bins. And the spill bin is a nice technique so that if I do have a leakage, it's not going to drip on my other chemicals and chemical containers and cause a problem. Another best practice, especially in laboratories, because chemical products can go bad when they get old, is they've all got a nice manufacturer label here, but it's a nice technique is to take a Sharpie and write the date that you opened it. So I would write today's date, October 1st, 2015, and I would put my initials there. Okay, we did have a question get written in about storage of toner cartridges for printers. And so what we want is that we want those toner cartridges to be protected from getting dented so they don't leak. And we want those toner cartridges to be closed and sealed so they're not leaking. They are labeled nicely from the manufacturer. Okay. Another thing that we're looking at is no spills and no rust. If I walk into one of your storage closets and I see a lot of rust, that's a bad sign. I'm going to probe deeper and see what's going on there. Another thing is that if I open up one of your storage closets and I'm hit by a wall of odor, like VOCs or acid, that's not normal. And I'm going to spend a lot of time in that area asking more questions and trying to solve that problem because it is not normal and we don't want to have that. Okay, so here's a little quiz for the group. Can you see 3 things that are wrong in this picture? Okay, so item number 1 that I see first is this label. And I hope you all just got a chuckle out of it. That label is not acceptable. What do I need to see? I need to see the chemical name. I need to see the hazard warning and the name of the manufacturer. Another thing I see on this container is I see crystallization up top. That is not normal and that is very bad. The crystallization shows me that that stopper is not leak proof. I have some evaporation of VOCs that are then condensing and causing crystals on the outside. So now I have workers, when they pick up that container, will be exposed to the chemical even when the container is closed. That is not normal. When I pick up a chemical container, just like I pick up a water bottle, my hand should not be wet and I should not be exposed to the chemical product inside the container. The other problem with this container, when you see crystals, crystals are bad. You might need the hazmat squad. Some of those crystals can be peroxides that become explosive on contact. So if I try to unscrew that cap, it could actually explode in my hands. So the clue on whether or not this is just crystals that are not explosive or the bad crystals, the clue is what is the contents. If I have a proper label, it gives me a clue about the nature of those crystals and whether I need to call hazmat. All right, so over on the right picture, let's talk about storage here. If I walk into that workplace, that counter there is sending me some signals. The signals it's telling me is that the person who's running or managing this the hazard communication program is not in control of the hazard communication program. It's showing me that the workers here and the supervisor do not know what chemicals they're using. They do not know when they were opened. They do not know how to use them properly, store them properly, and clean those containers. So when I enter a workplace that looks like this, the inspection's a little bit longer. I end up staying longer, asking more questions, asking you to make more corrections. And that probably makes sense to most people. Okay, one more tip that we have about storage is do not use old food containers to store your chemical products. We had a case at an ice rink where the edges of the rink used to get scuffed up, and so they had a nice degreaser 409 type product to take those black scuff marks off the walls. And the product was blue. Turns out the person who was doing the cleaning jumped on their Zamboni and left that container behind. It was an old Gatorade container that he was using for the graffiti remover. A hockey team came in, sat down on the bench, and one kid picked up that bottle and took a swig. So we do not want to use old food containers. You're opening yourself up to trouble. I cannot tell if that blue liquid is antifreeze, windshield cleaner, window cleaner. It could be anything. Okay, is this your closet? If this is what your chemical storage closet looks like, you need to do a few things. You need to write down a list of every product you've got there. That's your inventory list. For each product on that list, you need to obtain a safety data sheet. And then you need to look through all of those chemical containers to make sure that they've got the proper label. So here there's two. This one might be missing a label. This one here might be missing a label, or it might be pre-filled with the correct one. So if this is your closet, you may have more work to do than you bargained for. So what we do suggest sometimes is to look at what you've got and to see if you really need it. Ask that question. Did I use that in the past 12 months? Is it something that is in regular rotational use, or is it something that's sort of nice to have just in case? If it's not in regular use, we do suggest that you not maintain it anymore and that you get rid of it. It makes your HAZCOM program easier to manage. Which gets us into purchasing chemicals. We do suggest that you purchase only the chemicals that you really need and only the chemicals quantities that you're going to use this year. So sometimes buying a 55-gallon drum can be cheaper. But we do encourage you to look at how much you actually use per year and just buy that amount. So what we wanted to do here also in this seminar or in this webinar is to give you an introduction to environmentally preferable products. There is an Executive Order 515 for executive branch offices to purchase environmentally preferable products. And they have a wonderful website. And you can see over here, there's buttons you can push on green cleaning chemicals and other sections to get a list of the preferable products that have actually been looked at by this group and pre-approved by the group. So purchasing the environmentally preferable products, the executive branch state agencies are required to use those, and that is under contract FAC 85. And you can access that on the ComBuy's website, which is combuys.com. So 2 slides ago, I showed you that custodial closet where there was several chemicals in there, and we weren't really sure which products were being used. It's not required, but it's a good idea. It's a success story that many agencies have been able to do, We've seen several school systems move to this wall-mounted product. We've seen several nursing homes move over to this wall-mounted product, and in Department of Corrections, you've got some of these also, and they're terrific. There's different brands out there. We don't endorse any brands. It's just the concept of what this wall-mounted unit is doing. And what it's doing is that you buy a concentrate, you open the lid of the concentrate, you snap it into this unit here, and then there's a water hose. When you dispense this material, there's a computer in there that adds the exact amount of water and plus concentrate to get your final product. It makes it easier for your workers to use. It makes sure that you're using the exact recipe, so you're saving money on your chemicals. And you're also safer for your workers because they're using a water-diluted product, which is safer for them. So if you're also involved in purchasing chemicals, we just wanted to give you a little tip here on there are 3 products we'd like you to avoid because they trigger asthma. Over on the picture here is a foaming product. It's sort of like scrubbing bubbles that you might have in your house. And you spray it on glass, it foams up, and it almost removes all grime, grease, residue. It's like a miracle product. It's wonderful. However, when it foams, it off-gasses small particulates. And the off-gassing can cause throat and respiratory irritation and can trigger asthma in folks that don't have asthma yet or folks that already have asthma. And there is a main ingredient that causes that asthma trigger. It is the glycol family. So when you read the ingredient label, you might see a very long chemical name. But what I want you to hone in on is just remember the glycol part. If you see that glycol word, we want you to pause and say, gee, do I really need this product? Is there a different product that I could use instead? The glycol, unfortunately, does have a synonym that does not have the word glycol in it. That synonym is called 2-butoxyethanol. It has the same health effects. Now, let's say you do have a graffiti and a grime and a glass problem. It might be, you might be able to just use that product once a month instead of every day. It's the everyday action of this breathing the foam VOCs that causes problems. Another chemical that we'd like you to avoid having on site is ammonia, and there's a couple of reasons why. One of the reasons is that it does have a toxic reaction and cause toxic off-gassing with some of your other cleaning products, including bleach. And the second is, if you're using one of these wall-mounted units, you don't need the ammonia at all. It's completely been replaced, and so your ammonia is redundant. It's not necessary, and having it on site just invites hazmat issues that you wouldn't have if you don't have it on your property. And so another thing we'd also like you to do is look at the products that you're using and to ask yourself the question, do I use bleach? And if you're using bleach, ask yourself, why do I, and do I really have to? And the reason why we'd like you to avoid bleach is because it does trigger asthma and it does cause skin rashes. Now, one of the reasons why it causes asthma is usually because people use it in a recipe that's too strong. Some people are using bleach straight out of the bottle without adding any water. That is too strong, and it can cause those asthma reactions. Now, a lot of employers, and I do sympathize, want to use bleach because the price is right. For 89 cents, I can buy that gallon of bleach. So if you're buying the bleach because of cost, I would like to encourage you to make sure that you're using the recipe that you need. So the Center for Disease Control has done studies on how well bleach will kill HIV, hepatitis, and other germs and bacteria that you find in blood and feces. And it turns out the recipe does not have to be that strong. It could be 600 parts per million. What that means is that if my final quantity, if I'm making a quart spray bottle of a bleach water solution, I only have to put in 2 teaspoons of bleach into that quart of water for me to kill all of those germs. So this is a nice recipe. What happens is that I'm going to have less odor, which means less irritation, and I'm going to have more water, which means I'm going to have less potential for a rash. If my final concentration is going to be 1.5 gallons, I'm just adding 1/4 cup. That's a small amount. So you can have a little measuring cup with you, you pour in 1/4 cup, and you're making 1.5 gallons of solution. Some places I've seen, they need to have a large container, a large 5-gallon bug sprayer of a bleach water solution. If you're making that bug sprayer 5-gallon size, you're going to take your household bleach that you buy, and you're only going to add 3/4 cup. So that's a little 1/2 cup scoop and a 1/4 cup scoop plus 5 gallons of water, and you will have the recipe that kills all of the viruses and bacteria in blood and feces. Okay, so let's jump ahead now to personal protective equipment. So we just went through your building. We made an inventory list of all the chemical products that you've got. While we were doing that, we were sort of asking the question, what do you use this for? When do you use this? Why do you use it? How do you use it? And so we look at your tasks. For each one of those tasks, we want you to pick out the gloves that you might need and the other protective equipment that you might need. So for instance, and this little chart is in the handout that we have. A lot of buildings, the facilities, people will be doing floor stripping and re-waxing the tile floors twice a year. So we list that task down. We look at the product that they're using to see if they need any goggles, if they need ventilation, if they need gloves, and if they need shoes. We went, in the past 6 months, we've been to several schools where they do the floor stripping, and in order that product, the first product that they lay down is corrosive, and we had 2 or 3 people where the floor stripper ate through their sneakers. They had a mesh sneaker. The product leaked through and gave them a chemical burn on their foot. So we want you to look at that task and say, the mesh sneaker is not appropriate for the floor stripping. We want you to have a leather shoe, and in some cases it might be even better to have a rubber overboot to protect the feet. So we want you to look at the tasks that you've got and any personal protective equipment that you need. Okay, so one of the last aspects of a HAZCOM program is training. You are required to inform your workers if some of the products they use can cause health effects, and tell them the work practices and protective equipment to protect themselves. So I know if for me as a worker, I would like to know if anything I handle causes cancer, causes kidney damage, causes lung damage. I'd like to know that. We also need to tell them if there's any fire hazards, pressure release hazards with compressed gas cylinders, that type of thing. And then we walk them through the work practices. You can say, look, we're using this chemical, but this is how you're going to use it safely. We're going to use it in ventilation. We're going to keep all our containers closed. Here's the standard procedures. Here's the recipe that you use for mixing that bleach. Here's the protective equipment that you should use. And if you do get splashed in the face, here's how to use an eye wash. It's a very straightforward training. . there is some nuance and some difference between state agencies now and city and town workers. And the reason why is because the way the right to know law and the HAZCOM regulation have a slightly different rule for how often training needs to be done. I'll walk you through it real quick. Both of them require pre-assignment training. So before I ask a worker to use a hazardous chemical, I need to train that worker on how to use it correctly. Next is repeating the training and doing a refresher. Okay, so for the city-town workers, it's an annual training requirement is in the regulation. For my executive branch workers, because the new OSHA law kicked in, that refresher training just became a little easier on you. You only need to do a refresher training if a new hazard is added. It's not if a chemical name changes. So if I buy bleach from Stop and Shop, but I run out and I buy my next batch of bleach from Home Depot, it's the same hazard. I do not need to repeat training just because I bought it from a different vendor. That is the same rule for right to know, but right to know here requires annual training. And the annual training is actually a nice feature. It lets me walk through my storage closets again and say, hey, is what I have in my HAZCOM program actually correct? Have I bought any new chemicals this year and I forgot to write them down on my inventory list? It's a chance to catch up. You might also have had some new hires that sort of slipped through the cracks and didn't get the original training. The annual training is a good catch-up method. But here, we're going to talk a little bit about how long training should be. We'll talk about who does the training first. Who does your right to know and HAZCOM training? And the answer is we don't want it to be complicated. Anyone who's comfortable in the subject matter can conduct that training. So that might be one of your coworkers, might be a fellow employee, it might be your supervisor, or it might be a department manager who's comfortable with the material is going to provide that training. In addition, some of your vendors offer to come out and do the training. So a lot of custodial products and kitchen products, your vendor distributor offers to come out once a year and have a session. You can take them up on that. That's terrific. You are also allowed to hire a consultant, which we call a third party, who's comfortable with the material. You can hire them to do the training. However, under right to know, if your department falls under the right to know law, the third party consultant needs to be registered with DLS. That's because back in 1984, the thought was, well, at the time, the internet didn't exist, and getting the safety data sheets was actually very challenging to do. It's not as challenging anymore, and more people are comfortable with the information. But for the executive branch state agency, if you hire out someone to do that training for you, they do not need to be registered because you're falling under a different regulation. Another common question we get is a training quiz required? And the answer there is no. You do not need to give a quiz and test people on their knowledge. Some people don't like to read, and a quiz can be very threatening. And we're not here to threaten workers. We're here to help them. But some employers do select to use a quiz. That's okay. The quiz just proves that the person was in the room. That's how I use a quiz. You can walk up to someone and say, hey, did you ever get trained? And I'm like, no, I've never been trained. And here's the quiz they took 2 months ago. So sometimes you can use a quiz for that just to prove that someone was in the room. And so for that purpose, you don't have to have a score. They can't fail out of their jobs because they only got an 80 or an 85. Scoring those is not important. And also, you can use it as a training tool. If you're using it in a classroom setting, everyone in the classroom can talk about the answers together and write them down together. In that way, it's a learning tool and not a kind of an exam penalty type environment. So another question we get is how long is the training? Because I did get a phone call from a school system once who was having trouble getting teachers together for their 8-hour HAZCOM training. So we do not expect your hazard communication and right to know training to be 8 hours long. So for instance, when I give it to a group, usually I will combine it with training on personal protective equipment, and usually all of the material we need to be covered gets covered in less than an hour. That is for your typical setting. So here your typical setting could be a custodian closet, it could be your school kitchen or your hospital kitchen, it could be a wastewater treatment plant, it could be a hospital laundry. We will be able to review MSDSs and review work practices with them within 30 minutes to an hour. However, there are some settings where that might not be enough. So over at your colleges and universities, they do have some very interesting labs with some very exotic chemicals. So in that case, you may need to have a 30-minute or 1-hour training for each particular lab. So if they're doing a lab with cyanide or mercury or something that bursts into flame when it contacts air, you would need to have specific training on that for each project. But that's sort of a different setting. Oh, but let's talk about, that's how long is your initial training. Let's talk then about how long is your annual training. So if your workplace falls under the right to know law, it says you need to do the annual training. But your refresher training could be shorter than that initial half hour. You're reviewing some safety data sheets. You're reviewing the work practices. You're asking them, hey, did you have any trouble last year with this chemical products? Do you have any ideas on how to use this more safely? And that refresher training can be done usually a little faster. You'll still have a sign-in sheet to confirm that you did it, but it's not as elaborate. The last stage of our HAZCOM program is your record keeping your records, so keeping your training records and making sure that someone is keeping those safety data sheets. In our download box down here lower right, we do have a self-audit checklist that you can download. It walks you through the content areas that we're in, that are in the regulation, and the content areas that were in this webinar. And you can measure yourself. It's just an optional tool. It's not mandatory. Some agencies have asked us for a tool, so we drafted one up. Keep it in-house between you, your facility managers, and your safety committees. You do not have to give it to Department of Labor standards. Okay, so a summary of today's webinar. We have hit the 2 o'clock mark. You can type in any questions there if you want to stay for a Q&A. I can unmute your phones if you want to try to call in, speak in, and we'll go from there. But I thank you for attending our webinar. And on the last page here, we do have an email hotline. If you have additional questions, you can type in your questions to our mailbox, and we can help you there.
The conference is now in talk mode.